Hi, I'm Rashonda Kay. This is Reading with Rashonda. We're reading Clotel by William Wells Brown. We are on chapter 26, The Escape. No refuge is found in our unhallowed ground, for the wretched in slavery's manacles bound, while our star-spangled banner in vain boasts to wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. We left Mary, the daughter of Clotel, in the capacity of a servant in her own father's house, where she had been taken by her mistress for the ostensible purpose of plunging her husband into the depths of humiliation. At first, the young girl was treated with great severity, but after finding that Horatio Green had lost all feeling for his child, Mrs. Green's own heart became touched for the offspring of her husband, and she became its friend. Oh, we're clearly not going to make it through this chapter. After finding that Horatio Green had lost all feeling for his child, okay, did he really lose all feeling for his child? Is he pretending to have lost all feeling for his child? What kind of person can lose all feeling for their child or even pretend? But let's get to his wife when she became its friend. Not her friend, its friend. Ah. All right, I'm going to keep reading. Mary had grown still more beautiful, and like most of her sex in that country, was fast coming to maturity. The arrest of Clotel, while trying to rescue her daughter, did not reach the ears of the latter till her mother had been removed from Richmond to Washington. The mother had passed from time to eternity before the daughter knew that she had been in the neighborhood. Horatio Green was not in Richmond at the time of Clotel's arrest. Had he been there, it is not probable, but he would have made an effort to save her. She was not his slave, and therefore was beyond his power, even had he been there and inclined to aid her. The revolt amongst the slaves had been brought to an end, and most of the insurgents either put to death or sent out of the state. One, however, remained in prison. He was the slave of Horatio Green, and had been a servant in his master's dwelling. He, too, could boast that his father was an American statesman. His name was George. His mother had been employed as a servant in one of the principal hotels in Washington, where members of Congress usually put up. So George's dad was probably a congressman. After George's birth, his mother was sold to a slave trader, and he to an agent of Mr. Green, the father of Horatio. George was as white as most white persons. No one would suppose that any African blood coursed through his veins. His hair was straight, soft, fine, and light. His eyes blue, nose prominent, lips thin, his head well formed, forehead high and prominent, and he was often taken for a free white person by those who did not know him. Notice free white person. Did they need to say free? White people are free, except for when they are slaves, right? Like, this is bananas. This is why we read stuff like this. This made his condition still more intolerable, for one so white seldom ever receives fair treatment at the hands of his fellow slaves, and the whites usually regard such slaves as persons who, if not often flogged and otherwise ill-treated, to remind them of their condition, would soon forget that they were slaves and think themselves as good as white folks. George's opportunities were far greater than most slaves. Being in his master's house and waiting on educated white people, he had become very familiar with the English language. He had heard his master and visitors speak of the downtrodden and oppressed Poles. He had heard them talk of going to Greece to fight for Grecian liberty and against the oppressors of that ill-fated people. George, fired with the love of freedom and zeal for the cause of his enslaved countrymen, joined the insurgents, and with them had been defeated and captured. He was the only one remaining of these unfortunate people, and he would have been put to death with them, but for a circumstance that occurred some weeks before the outbreak. The courthouse had, by accident, taken fire and was fast consuming. The engines could not be made to work, and all hope of saving the building seemed at an end. In one of the upper chambers there was a small box containing some valuable deeds belonging to the city. A ladder was placed against the house, leading from the street to the window of the room in which the box stood. The wind blew strong and swept the flames in that direction. Broad sheets of fire were blown again and again over that part of the building, and then the wind would lift the pall of smoke, which showed that the work of destruction was not yet accomplished. While the doomed building was thus exposed, and before the destroying element had made its final visit, as it did soon after, George was standing by, and hearing that much depended on the contents of the box, and seeing no one disposed to venture through the fiery element to save the treasure, mounted the ladder and made his way to the window, entered the room, and was soon seen descending with the much-valued box. 3 cheers rent the air as the young slave fell from the ladder when near the ground. The white men took him up in their arms to see if he had sustained any injury. His hair was burnt, eyebrows closely singed, and his clothes smelt strongly of smoke. But the heroic young slave was unhurt. The city authorities, at their next meeting, passed a vote of thanks to George's master. Passed a vote of thanks to George's master. Not passed a vote of thanks to George. And do you have to pass a vote to thank somebody for saving your treasure box from the courthouse? All right. The city authorities at their next meeting passed a vote of thanks to George's master for the lasting benefit that the slave had rendered the public, and commended the poor boy to the special favor of his owner. When George was on trial for participating in the revolt, this meritorious act, as they were pleased to term it, was brought up in his favor. His trial was put off from session to session till he had been in prison more than a year. At last, however, he was convicted of high treason and sentenced to be hanged within 10 days of that time. The judge asked the slave if he had anything to say why sentence of death should not be passed on him. George stood for a moment in silence and then said, "As I cannot speak as I should wish, I will say nothing." "You may say what you please," said the judge. "You had a good master," continued he, "and still you were dissatisfied. You left your master and joined the Negroes who were burning our houses and killing our wives." "As you have given me permission to speak," remarked George, "I will tell you why I joined the revolted Negroes. I have never heard my master read in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created free and equal, and this caused me to inquire of myself why I was a slave. I also heard him talking with some of his visitors about the war in England, and he said all wars and fighting for freedom were just and right. If so, in what am I wrong? The grievance of which your fathers complained and which caused the Revolutionary War were trifling in comparison with the wrongs and sufferings of those who were engaged in the late revolt. Your fathers were never slaves. Ours are. Your fathers were never bought and sold like cattle, never shut out from the light of knowledge and religion, never subjected to the lash of brutal taskmasters. For the crime of having dark skin, my people suffer the pangs of hunger, the infliction of stripes, and the ignominy of brutal servitude. We are kept in heathenish darkness by laws expressly enacted to make our instruction a criminal offense. What right has one man to the bones, sinews, blood, and nerves of another? Did not one God make us all? You say your fathers fought for freedom, so did we. You tell me that I am to be put to death for violating the laws of the land? Did not the American revolutionists violate the laws when they struck for liberty? They were revolters, but their success made them patriots. We were revolters, and our failure makes us rebels. Had we succeeded, we would have been patriots too. Success makes the difference. You make merry on the 4th of July. The thunder of cannon and ringing of bells announce it as the birthday of American independence. Yet while these cannons are roaring and bells ringing, 1/6 of the people of this land are in chains and slavery. You boast that this is the land of the free, but a traditionary freedom will not save you. It will not do to praise your fathers and build their sepulchres. Worse for you that you have such an inheritance, if you spend it foolishly and are unable to appreciate its worth. Sad if the genius of a true humanity, beholding you with tearful eyes from the mount of vision, shall fold his wings in sorrowing pity and repeat the strain, O land of Washington, how often would I have gathered thy children together as a hen doth gather her brood under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. This is all I have to say. I have done. Nearly everyone present was melted to tears. Even the judge seemed taken by surprise at the intelligence of the young slave. But George was a slave, and an example must be made of him, and therefore he was sentenced. Being employed in the same house with Mary, the daughter of Clotel, George had become attached to her, and the young lovers fondly looked forward to the time when they should be husband and wife. After George had been sentenced to death, Mary was still more attentive to him, and begged and obtained leave of her mistress to visit him in his cell. The poor girl paid a daily visit to him, to whom she had pledged her heart and hand. At one of these meetings, and only 4 days from the time fixed for the execution, while Mary was seated in George's cell, it occurred to her that she might yet save him from a felon's doom. She revealed to him the secret that was then occupying her thoughts, viz. That George should exchange clothes with her and thus attempt to escape in disguise. I love it. Our friend Clotel escaped dressed as a white man, and perhaps our friend George is going to escape as a white woman. I love it. Or at the very least as a white-skinned black woman, but escape is happening, and so is cross-dressing. William Wells Brown, ha! You are fascinating to me. I'll continue. But he would not for a single moment listen to the proposition. Not that he feared detection, but he would not consent to place an innocent and affectionate girl in a position where she might have to suffer for him. Mary pleaded, but in vain. George was inflexible. The poor girl left her lover with a heavy heart, regretting that her scheme had proved unsuccessful. Towards the close of the day, Mary again appeared at the prison door for admission, and was soon by the side of him whom she so ardently loved. While there the clouds which had overhung the city for some hours broke, and the rain fell in torrents amid the most terrific thunder and lightning. In the most persuasive manner possible, Mary again importuned George to avail himself of her assistance to escape from an ignominious death. After assuring him that she, not being the person condemned, would not receive any injury. Has she been paying attention? That's very sweet. But just because you're innocent doesn't mean that you won't be proven guilty. Anyway, after assuring him that she, not being the person condemned, would not receive any injury, he at last consented, and they began to exchange apparel. As George was of small stature, and both were white, there was no difficulty in passing out without detection, because folks don't pay attention to people's facial features and what they really look like. And as she usually left the cell weeping, with handkerchief in hand, and sometimes at her face, he had only to adopt this mode, and his escape was safe. They had kissed each other, and Mary had told George where he would find a small parcel of provisions which she had placed in a secluded spot, when the prison keeper opened the door and said, "Come, girl, it is time for you to go." Clearly, Mary knew she was going to change his mind, because she stashed a little satchel of provisions for him. Nice. Anyway, the prison keeper opened the door and said, "Come, girl, it is time for you to go." George again embraced Mary and passed out of the jail. It was already dark, and the street lamps were lighted, so that our hero in his new dress had no dread of detection. The provisions were sought out and found, and poor George was soon on the road towards Canada, but neither of them had once thought of a change of dress for George when he should have escaped, and he had walked but a short distance before he felt that a change of his apparel would facilitate his progress. But he dared not go amongst even his colored associates for fear of being betrayed. However, he made the best of his way on towards Canada, hiding in the woods during the day and traveling by the guidance of the North Star at night. And dressed as a woman. Let's not leave that out. And dressed as a woman. With the poet, he could truly say, "Star of the north, while blazing day pours round me its full tide of light, and hides thy pale but faithful ray, I too lie hid and long for night." Something that strikes me, okay, he's white, he's wearing a dress, but he is a man. So unlike Clotel, when she was dressed as a man, and she had the first time the kerchief around her face, and the second time the fake whiskers, George probably has real whiskers, right? Like he's a full-grown man. He's probably got some facial hair. Does maybe in the provisions there was a razor and he's shaving every single day. Ooh, interesting. You know what? I'm going to stop here. It's been 15 minutes. We're not going to finish. Oh, there's only, yeah, we're going to go ahead and stop. I might have more commentary. Who knows? Anyway, this was chapter 26, I think. We're almost done with chapter 26. Yes, chapter 26 of Clotel by William Wells Brown. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.